Hey there, I'm Kat, and this is Brews and Reviews. In today's video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about Crescent City Book 3, House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J Maas. This is going to be a spoilery book talk, so if you don't want any spoilers, or if you haven't read this book yet, then this probably isn't the video for you, because I'm going to be talking about all of my thoughts and feelings about this book, and how I enjoyed it, because I did enjoy it. I did end up rating this book 5 out of 5 stars. So let's talk about it. So first up, let's talk about the reading order, because I do think that's important. You need to obviously have read the first 2 books in the Crescent City series, but you also need to have read all of the ACOTAR books. If you haven't read the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, you're gonna probably be very confused by a lot of things that happen in this, especially Nestor's book. If it's been a while since you read A Court of Silver Flames, you should probably reread that one because it's very relevant. When it comes to Throne of Glass, I know there's a lot of speculation on whether any of the characters from that were going to appear in this. They didn't, but there were references to the Throne of Glass universe, and things that you would notice had you read Throne of Glass. But I think if you hadn't read Throne of Glass, then it's not going to spoil anything for you. They are just references to things in the world that you could be like, oh, that's that. But if you haven't read them, then you just wouldn't make that connection, and it would be fine. Now, on to House of Flame and Shadow. We start off this book with our main characters sort of strewn to the wind in very, very precarious situations. At the end of the last book, Bryce transported herself to the Fae homeworld, which is Prythian from the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. And she ends up in front of the Inner Circle, who are then obviously questioning her because she's just teleported into their world, speaking a different language, and they're like, what? Whoa. What's going on here? Hunt, Rune, and Baxian have been captured by the Asteri. They're currently being tortured by Pollux in really horrible ways, and Lydia is just having to watch and pretend that she's on board with the torture, which is not fun. Now, the people who weren't involved in that end conflict, so you've got Declan, Flynn, Ethan, and Sigrid, who is the lost Fendir heir. They're all trying to figure out what to do next and how to free Rune and the others from being tortured to death. Meanwhile, Tharian sold himself to the Viper Queen at the end of the last book and is enthralled by her blood and doing, like, fights to the death for her. Good choice, Tharian. So obviously these characters are all split up at the start of the book, and we're constantly switching perspectives, which I think is done in a really effective way. I don't think we spent too long with any one perspective, so that there wasn't any point in time when you were like, oh my god, I'm so bored of this perspective, can you just go back to the more interesting perspective? Because everyone had valid perspectives, and it was like, okay, nobody's doing anything really boring right now. Everyone's doing interesting things, and I feel like it kept the story moving at a really good pace. I didn't have any pacing problems with this book, and that has been one of my biggest gripes about the first and second book in this series, because I was like, part 2 is so slow. Part 2, thrill ride. Part 3, oh my god, could not stop. I should mention that I did read this all in one night, and I stayed up till 5 a.m. to read it, so I'm a little bit delusional right now. If anything comes out wrong, that's because I'm tired. So I want to talk about the section of the plot that takes place in Prythian first, because there's a lot more plot that happens in the Crescent City timeline. So first up, I want to talk about the stuff that happens in part 1 that's set in Prythian. Bryce is obviously very distrusted by the Inner Circle, because they're like, who is this? Why has she got the sword? This is all very dodgy, and she reveals some of the stuff about her world, how they have guns and stuff, and how there's like a giant threat, and they're all like, super! They also realize very quickly that she has the horn inked into her skin, so she's technically made like Nestor is, and that leads them to locking her in a dungeon in the Court of Nightmares for a bit. So she decides she's just gonna jump through a hole in the floor into a pit of writhing beasts and walk out, because Bryce, I really enjoyed that she did that, because she's so reckless, but at the same time I'm like, yeah, go Bryce. To be honest, one of my favourite things about the encounters between the ACOTAR gang and Bryce is that they both come off as intelligent. They both make clever plays that lead them all coming off as clever, and that they're constantly trying to outwit each other and get information out in like a clever way. I don't really know how to describe it, but I didn't really feel like it was like one character had like the advantage on the other, which is really nice, because obviously we have an attachment for both Bryce and the Inner Circle, and it would be really sucky to see them go against each other in a way that made one of the characters seem lesser. I just feel like this was dealt in a respectful way of the characters, because they're all main characters and they're all very clever and they do all of these different things, and it's like, well, I'm glad we didn't see anyone get disrespected in this instance, because it was an option, and I feel like we were okay. Nestor and Asriel end up in this tunnel with Bryce, and they're sort of cut off from everybody else, and they're wandering through it because Bryce's starlight is leading her to a specific place, and she's like, okay, I'll follow it, because why not? And I personally really loved seeing Nestor and Asriel have more of a spotlight. I will say that I'm slightly disappointed that there wasn't more Rhys and Feyre, because I love them, but at the same time, I get it. Since my last reread of A Court of Silver Flames, I actually adore Nestor, so I was so happy to see her in this book behaving how she behaved. Ugh, I loved it. The fact that there's a Midgard worm hidden underneath the Court of Nightmares is just fantastic. I really enjoyed the encounter that they had with the Midgard worm and how Nesta used the mask to defeat it. I just thought it was really cool, and I love the fact that now both Feyre and Nesta are like masters of the worms, because they've just killed them all, and I think it's really cool. I feel like a long-standing theory in the A Court of Thorns and Roses fandom has been that these sacred mountains probably have stuff underneath them that's worth exploring, and that's proved correct in this book, so that was really interesting to see. I really like how Bryce and Nesta interact with each other, because I feel like those two characters would get along if they had been given more time to actually spend with each other in like a less hostile environment, because Bryce does constantly believe that they're gonna like try and chop the horn off of her back and kill her. Which is fair, because they might do that. So anyway, the tunnels lead to the prison, and they actually come out in the same room where Nesta found the harp in A Court of Silver Flames. And it turns out there is a message there from one of Thea's daughters, Selene, and Asriel comments that she looks like Rhysand's sister, and I'm like, ah! Because I feel like we all want more information about Rhysand's sister anyway. Selene is one of Rhys's ancestors, and her sister Helena is one of Bryce's ancestors, so technically they're very, very, very long distance cousins. Like 15,000 years ago cousins, but like it counts. And I've got to say I love this moment because Selene basically videoed herself and was like, I'm gonna tell you my life story and all the things that I did. By the way, this used to be the Dusk Court, which is another long-standing theory that A Court of Thorns and Roses fans have had, and they've been like, seems like there could have been another court there. And there was, and there may still be after this. Bryce tries to escape because she's also trying to get Truth Teller because it matches Guardian / the Star Sword, and they're supposed to be brought together, and that's how she's supposed to defeat the Asteri. So she tries to have a fight with Nesta and Az to try and stop them from getting Rhys, and they fall through the floor and discover that there is an Asteri entombed in a cavern beneath them, and she wakes up and is like, let me out, slaves, I'm gonna do some business. I think it's so interesting to have this information about the Daglan, who are also known as the Asteri. They were called the Daglan when they were trying to take over Prythian, but actually having it from like the horse's mouth, and where she was like telling them about things, like how magic could be offered up to feed them via a tithe, so if you sent any magic into them, they were just going to absorb it. We also learned that the Asteri are the reason that if the cauldron is destroyed, then the whole world will be destroyed, because it's like a kill switch that they built into the power of the world. And I'm like, oh, okay, great, love it. I wondered how this happened, but super. Nesta ends up killing the Asteri, and I'm like, yes, Nesta, please, just continue to be badass, I love you. And Bryce manages to use the horn to get back to her world, and she's like, see you guys, bye. So I was expecting that to be all of the A Court of Thorns and Roses gang that we actually saw in this, and I was happy that it wasn't, but they don't come into it again until much later in the book. So I was like, oh, surprised when they came back into it. Also, I forgot to mention, the horn is part of the Dread Trove, which is something that I realised on page 22 of this book, because it's briefly mentioned in A Court of Silver Flames that some people say that there might have been a fourth object in the Dread Trove and people had forgotten it. And I was on page 22 of this book and I was like, oh my god, it's part of the Dread Trove, isn't it? It's the fourth object, and they confirmed it like 30 pages later, and I was like, yes! I got that slightly before the information was revealed, I'll take it. So after that whole section that did make me very, very happy and I enjoyed a lot, let's go back and talk about our imprisoned trio of Hunt, Rune, and Baxian, who are just having the worst time. Now, previously, I've spoken about how I didn't like the fact that in the world of Crescent City, people can just grow back limbs, and I thought it kind of just lessened the stakes, and wow, I uncovered a new respect for the fact that people can grow things back in the torture scenes, where you can chop anything off, really, and it'll just grow back, and it'll be absolutely horrific to sit through. So in one sense it does lessen the stakes for them dying if they're in like free situations, but in a trapped situation it's absolutely horrible, and I kind of loved it. Not in the sense that people were being tortured, but the fact that it had more relevance, I suppose. That whole section is really horrible to read about, especially the bit where Baxian has to chew off Rune's hand. Like, I literally sat there and I was like, he bites off his hand? And oh, it was a moment. In retrospect, I enjoyed that a lot, but it was like, wow, okay, this is where we're going with this. Meanwhile, Lydia, who loves Rune, but is being currently shut out by Rune because he's like, you're evil, and she's like, I'm not. Lydia is still undercover, so she is having to put up with the fact that they're being tortured and put up with sleeping with the guy that's torturing them, even though she doesn't want to. But she finds out that the Harpy might be woken up, and she killed the Harpy in the end of the last book, so if the Harpy wakes up, then her cover's blown anyway. And she also finds out that Rune is scheduled to be killed to hurt Bryce and get more information out of the others. She's not having that. So she launches this whole escape plan, and she gets in touch with Declan, Flynn, Ethan, and everybody, and they're trying to escape, and it's such a good sequence. I really enjoyed that action sequence. she enlists Erithis, who is the queen of the fire sprites that's been kept in containment for like the entire time, and ends up freeing her in exchange for a distraction. And she manages to get Rune, Hunt and Baxian out, but she has to sort of split up from them, and then she gets hunted down and shot a lot in the face, and it's a very bad time. She almost doesn't come back from it, and there was a chapter of time when I thought that she had died, and I was like, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, I don't believe it. They couldn't just kill her like that. That would be so horrible, because the last thing that Rune said to her was like, I wish you were dead, and I was like, no, this can't be happening, I love her. But it's fine, she didn't die, so I was, you know, I was okay. Then when she wakes up and Rune is next to her and he's like, are you okay? And she immediately runs up when she realizes she's on the Ocean Queen's ship and runs to this school, because it turns out she's got twin children that are in there. And I was like, oh my god, Lydia's a mother? What? And she'd had these twins and adopted them out and paid for their living by serving the River Queen and being a spy. It just sort of breaks your heart for her a little bit, because it's so sad, but yeah, they were safe, so. Now let's pick up where we left off with Bryce. She manages to get back into her world and appears in the Autumn King's mansion, and he's like, I'm gonna chain you up. So he does that, and she's trying to learn more about the sword and the dagger together, and he's like, oh, I know some stuff about the sword and the dagger together, but you're worthless. But also I want to know more about the sword and dagger. So they do this thing where they talk back and forth and try and find information out from each other, and then Bryce is just like, oh, just kidding, I wasn't trapped at all. I could have freed myself at any time. Just wanted you to tell me how to use the dagger and the sword combined so that I could kill the Asteri, and I'm gonna leave now and just lock you in a cupboard. So she does, and I love that. While I had a bit of trouble with Bryce's character in House of Sky and Breath, she was totally back on form in this book. She was so badass with so many of the things she did, and I was like, yes, Bryce, please, lock that man in a cupboard, he's a dick. So she manages to figure out to use them and then winnows her way to Hunt. Now before I pick up with like the main storyline, I just want to go over two storylines that are happening throughout the book, and I just want to get them over with now. So, Tharion's storyline. Now Tharion is a character that I don't particularly love. He spends most of this book loathing himself, and it is kind of like Tharion and the quest to piss off all the queens he can, because he just manages to get on the bad side of all of the queens. First there was the River Queen, because he didn't want to marry her daughter even though they'd had sex, and he was like, I'll marry you, and then didn't for 10 years. And she was going to drag him down to the bottom of the river so that he would never be able to go on land again. So he was like, I'm going to defect. And he's gone off to the Viper Queen. And then he was like, I'm going to defect because you're drugging me and making me fight people, and I don't really want to do that either. So then he goes on to the Ocean Queen's ship, and she's like, you're staying on this ship because you're dangerous and you keep messing things up for other queens. And then he's like, peace. And then he follows Bryce. So he's like, the Viper Queen, the River Queen, the Ocean Queen, it just pissed off Bryce, and then he's got like a quartet. Tharion's storyline in this is so weird to me, but he ends up getting married to stop Flynn's sister from having to get married to someone else, and he's like, okay, cool, this is my life now. I mean, we get divorced later, but you know, this is fine. And personally, I'm not really invested in Tharion's relationship. I quite like the woman he gets married to. I also quite like Ari the Dragon, and I'm like, either of those, you can get on with them, but I don't really care what Tharion does, because he's fine. He's just not my favourite character. Now the next story I want to talk about is Ethan's storyline throughout this. He's a shifter, and in House of Sky and Breath he was kicked out of his pack for supporting Bryce, and he found the lost Fendir heir at the end of the last book. So the book starts off with him trying to be like, no, alright, okay, we'll try and figure out a way to get you to take over from Sabine. And then he ends up in a situation where the Viper Queen tricks him into accidentally murdering Sigrid, the lost Fendir heir. And it's just, it's a very bad time. And he spends the whole time covered in guilt, and he's like, I need to bring her back. Necromancy, please. And then he tries to bring her back, and she's like, I'm gonna be a Reaper instead because that sounds like more fun. And he's like, no, okay, somebody else. We can figure this out. She doesn't need to be a Reaper. And he spends this whole book trying to think of some way that Sigrid can become the next Prime and defeat Sabine, when I think it's been obvious since book 2 that he is obviously meant to be the Prime. And he is, in the end, he does become the Prime. But it drove me mad because he spends the whole time being like, not me, not me. It's definitely Sigrid, can't be me. It's you. So I got a bit frustrated with him. I did like his storyline overall, and I do like the idea that he could end up with Perry. I think they would make a cute couple because she obviously supports him, and there's definitely more magic hidden under there, so she is, I think, more powerful than is currently described. Right, back to the main storyline. Everyone goes to Avalon, which is this Fey Isle off the sea that's shrouded in mist and is like considered backwater. There's no technology or anything like that because it just doesn't work. And it's run by the Fey King Morven, whose son was Cormac, who was a rebel in the last book. And he's got these two murder twin nephews that are just assholes. They do appear to be Marty and get in people's minds, and it's just not very pleasant because they're not nice people. There's a whole thing about women basically being absolutely worthless except for breeding, and it goes on for a long time, and I'm like, wow, okay, right, this is your only principle and you're really sticking to it, so good for you, but also that's the wrong one to stick with. So they go there to try and find more information on how to get in touch with Hell because they think they can do it, and they can. So they go to the place where Rune first found the Star Sword, the Cave of Princes, and it turns out it's actually like full of salt that she can communicate with the realm of Hell. And she and Hunt have a nice meeting with the Princes of Hell where they talk about their plans going forward and what they've learned about the history of the world. Namely, Thea made some really bad mistakes and destroyed the land in many places. But it's quite interesting because Thea's magic was split amongst her two daughters and her, and that's why she ended up dying when she did. But Bryce has basically got to reunite that magic, and she collected some of it from Celine. She was born with some of it, and she's trying to find the third piece. It's also really good to learn Helena's secrets and how she was like, man, these dudes are just not... It's not going to work. Someone further down the line will fix this, but it's not these guys. And I like how this kind of results in Bryce understanding that she needs to free the land from its like hold on the magic. And she ends up healing it completely, and trees pop up and the ground moves and everything becomes nice and natural, and it's like, wow, a brand new place. But before that happens, the Princes of Hell drop a bombshell on Hunt and say, actually, you were kind of an experiment by us. We tried to experiment with the Thunderbirds and it didn't really work. You're like, kind of a Prince of Hell. And he's not the most pleased about that, obviously. But it does mean that he was engineered to be able to help Bryce. They weren't engineered to be mated, that's like a completely separate thing, but he is the perfect one to help her against the Asteri. A small side note about Hunt, because he spent the majority of this book really annoying me, because he spends the entire time doubting himself and this plan, and really not wanting to do anything about it, and just be like, me and Bryce should just go away. We should just leave, like, peace, I'm out. And he feels really guilty about all of the different things that have happened, and it just kind of got really annoying. So I had this theory that it was to do with the crown that Rigelus had put on his head, and I was thinking, oh, because he put it on, he'd like imbued it with this self-doubt and guilt and like made him really feel the emotions that, like the negative emotions, and I thought that would be really cool, but no, it turns out Hunt was just being depressing the entire time. Maybe I'll reread this later and not be annoyed by this and sort of understand it a little bit more, but for this read through, I didn't like it. I was like, Hunt, stop it. You're just being annoying now. You have to get on board, man. There's one way out of this situation, and it is the way that Bryce is saying, so hop on board. Back to the plot. When they come out of their meeting with the Princes of Hell, the two Fae Kings have teamed up together and they're like, listen, we're gonna kill all of you other people, but we'll keep all the Fae for breeding and then we can kill you later. That obviously doesn't pan out for them, and Rune ends up killing his dad, which is fabulous because his dad was a dick and spent like his whole youth abusing him, so it was really nice to see him die. And then Bryce kills King Morven as well, because he did deserve that. Let's be honest. They were never going to change, and they were asshole. So she becomes the queen of the Valbaran and the Avalon Fae, and she's like, I don't want this. I don't want this at all. She's kind of really prejudiced against the Fae at this point in time, and she's basically had poor experiences with most of the Fae. So everyone's kind of worried about her being in charge of them because they're like, what are you going to do? You hate them all. Some of us are nice. I really enjoyed how this was kind of resolved after she had a conversation with Baxian about how Danica felt about the same sort of situation, and how she had like the same sort of doubt about the current hierarchy and how it needed to change because it doesn't have to be the way that it is. And I really like how that impacted the way that Bryce dealt with it and changed how she was approaching the situation. So she wasn't just like, can't wait for the Fae to just be out of my hair forever. And she comes up with some alternate solutions, and I really liked how that came into it because it was nice to see Danica talk to somebody in the past, apparently. There are some other characters that I haven't really spoken about yet. Hypaxia and Jessica in the House of Flame and Shadow. This is obviously the house that is in the title of the book, so we spend a little bit of time there. Hypaxia ends up having to defect to the House of Flame and Shadow and is sort of ousted as the Queen of the Witches. Jessica, who we haven't really seen much of since book 1. She's kind of been this mysterious figure. Ends up revealing that she is about 15,000 years old, and she was actually a priestess in the Library of Parthos, which she has been sort of the keeper of the books ever since. She got cursed with this long life, and I think it was really nice to see what she did with her longevity, and it kind of sets her up as a similar character to Amren, which I will go into more later because obviously there are more parallels between her and Amren. I enjoyed the interactions that they had. Now there's a lot of stuff that happens between them revolving around Ethan trying to bring Sigrid back, but another really important thing that happens with with Ethan and Hypaxia is that they try and develop a cure for the parasite that has been infecting everyone and transforming them into first light when they die. So they have to find a cure for this because it is suppressing their magic, and they're all kind of weakened as a result of that. Ethan is the first one to take this sort of antidote, and he finds out that he has like frost magic as well as being able to change into a wolf. And this is about the same time when I realized that Shifter Fae is essentially the Fae from Throne of Glass. I'm like, such an idiot. I didn't realise that before. I mean, they did say that the Shifters had two forms, and they had an animal form and like the more human Fae form, and it was kind of basically described in the same way that the Throne of Glass Fae were described, and I was like, I'm such an idiot for not realising that before. So, you know, that was a really cool little side note that they've all come from different worlds, and that's why there's two different types of Fae, and that's why they think that they're different. So Hypaxia and Ethan end up going to the Bone Quarter because Ethan needs to speak to Connor and uses his frost magic to kill the Underking, and I like that a lot. Because the Underking was a dick, and he did deserve to die. Oh, well, he technically turned him into an ice cube, and then Hypaxia smashed the shit out of him, so she technically became the new leader of the House of Flame and Shadow, and appointed Jezebel as her second. Look, another Amarin parallel. Now, while they're there, Connor gives Ethan this bullet that is made out of second light and all the second light of the dead in the Bone Quarter, and he's like, give this to Bryce and she will use it and we will sacrifice ourselves for that because we're gone anyway, just like, this will give her a chance. So he takes the bullet for the Godslayer rifle and he's like, I need to get this and the antidotes to Bryce and Hunt before they take on the Asteri, and it's like a whole thing. So yeah, that was exciting. Though I do find myself questioning at this point in time. Everybody is at different sections of the world, and only a couple of people in the world can winnow and a couple of people can fly, so everyone else is just taking boats around. Like, what is the distance of this? What's the timeline of moving from place to place? Because I feel like we only get a map of Crescent City itself in the book, and I'm like, can I have a wider world map, please? Because I think I need one. I really do. I do really like how we get to see what a lot of the characters look like with this antidote to the parasite. We get to see Ethan and his frost powers. We get to see Tharian actually being able to manipulate water and do some really fun things with that. We get to see Rune, and we get to see Lydia, who's the most exciting one for me because she is one of the shifters, which means that she comes from the Throne of Glass world. She knows of an old legend of King Brannon, and she has fire powers. So to me, that says she's of King Brannon's line and maybe related to Aelin, and I'm like, I know it's like the tiniest little reference in the book, but it made me really happy. Now meanwhile, Bryce has like left everybody that she loves on Avalon because that's like kind of a safe place from the Asteri as they can't breach the mists. So Bryce winnows herself, Hunt, and her human parents to the Northern Gate in Nenya, which I will never stop being able to think of Nunya as in none your business, but that's an audiobook pronunciation problem and I just, it's annoying. So she says to everyone that that's where she's going to open the portal to hell because that was previously the portal to hell, but she doesn't. She actually opens a portal to the House of Wind where Nesta is sat on her own, and she's like, oh, hi, did you know I was alone? Is this why you've come here? And Bryce is like, hang on a sec, I need the mask. Could you lend me the mask? Literally my whole world is going to die if I don't have the mask. Please? Please. And she manages to convince Nesta to trade her parents for the mask on a loan. So Bryce knows her parents are safe in this other world and Nesta knows that she'll come back to her. I really like the communication that they had there because I don't really think that Nesta gave her the mask for her parents. I think Nesta just trusted her, and I feel like I wish I could see more of these characters together because I think that they would be just such a good pair if we could just have them all the time. But whatever, we can't. I get it. I do like the fact that Bryce is able to wear the mask and not die because she technically is made. She has one of the Dread Trove already on her, so it makes sense that she would be able to control the other half. She seems to be much better at controlling it than Nesta is, and I'm not really sure why, but I guess it's that she's been living with the Horn and she has all of these other magical powers that she had beforehand. I'm not sure. So Bryce closes the gate before Rhysand can turn up, and that's probably a wise decision because there's no way that Rhys would be letting her leave with the mask. He would be storming all over that shit, which is very fair, but also Bryce definitely needed the mask to win this fight. Bryce ends up using the mask to stop the Harpy, who was kind of like a resurrected husk that had been imbued with Hunt's lightning, but like had no mind of her own, no soul. She was just like a killing machine, and she had like a wrecked face, and it was gross. So while I think that that was cool when she used the mask to do it, I feel like maybe we could have seen the Harpy cause some more damage before then, but personal gripes. Bryce opens the gate so the armies of hell can come marching through, and they go and march on the Asteri's stronghold. I love the fact that Bryce was like, the Asteri like to pin up the wings of all of the people that they killed from the Fallen, and they didn't have sailing, so their souls are still attached, so I can control them and attach them to the really powerful new mech suits and use them as an army. I just think that's really cool, because I was waiting to see who might use these mech suits. They had to come back at some point, and I just really like that it was this army that had been absolutely destroyed by the Asteri. I feel like it was really good to see some tech elements appear in like this final fight, because I think it would have been a bit disappointing if we had these elements in the world and didn't really get to use them, because most of the rest of the fight takes place with magic and more traditional weaponry. Bryce manages to take on one of the Asteri with Truth Teller and the Star Sword combined, sends them into like this void world and just sucks them into nothing. So that was good. She just like one right out of existence. Now Ruin and Lydia at this point, who have realised that they're in love with each other, and I adore that, because Night and Day is still my favourite characters in this book, and I just love them so much. But they've realised that Lydia's kids have been kidnapped by Pollux, and he's an asshole, so they're like, we need to rescue them. And he gets them in this situation where he's gonna kill the kids in front of Lydia, and then Rune's like, no wait, have me instead. And then Lydia fully incinerates Pollux, and it was just... I love it. That was so fun, and I'm so glad to see it. Bryce and Hunt go to destroy the cache of First Light, and Rigelus is there, and a couple of the other Asteri are as well, and they try and start shooting their magic into it, and then Rigelus is like, hold on a second there, because remember that kill switch we were talking about earlier? Ha ha ha, if you destroy the First Light, then you destroy this world. It will just collapse completely, and you'll destroy everyone, so... let's all give up, really. You can leave if you want, but you're not going to be able to do anything. And Bryce, being self-sacrificing in nature, decides that she's going to destroy it anyway. And she shoots that bullet of Second Light that she got from the dead in the Bone Quarter into the First Light and destroys it, knowing that it will completely obliterate the Asteri's power and they'll just be like regular people. And then a black hole starts closing in, and it all gets very sci-fi a little bit. It made me think of, you know, in the first Avengers when Iron Man takes the missile into space and then he's just sort of floating in space. It made me think of that briefly. But Bryce ends up getting sucked into this black hole as well, because she created a black hole around the black hole and sucked the collapsing First Light hole into her black hole and essentially saved her world by doing that. Not gonna lie, it confused me a little bit, but I'm like, oh, I'll buy it. I'll take it. So Bryce ends up getting sucked in with the Asteri, and like some of them go past the point of no return, and she realizes that Rigelus might get out, so she's like, I guess I'm going down too. The horn on her back helps her to breathe until Rigelus touches her, and then it's like, so she's just floating around in space with no air, and it's a very bad time. So Hunt uses the little bit of power that she had imbued into him to put the mask on and command one of the mech suits to go and get Bryce in the spacey black hole place, and it turns out to be Shahara, his former lover, and I'm like, oh, such a moment. Such a nice little round moment. It, you know, made me cry. I cried a lot at the end of this book. But when Bryce is brought back through, she's like covered in a layer of frost and she is dead. Can't say I was the most happy with that, but pretty much immediately Jessica decides to yield her long life and give it to Bryce. So she basically swaps places and dies instead, and this is very Rhysand and Amren at the end of A Court of Wings and Ruin, and I'm like, well, this is kind of the same thing. This is kind of the same thing. Listen, I don't mind. I liked it. But I feel like if you didn't like that, you'd be really disappointed in this. I'm always here for a happy ending where people don't die. I mean, somebody did die in this, but it wasn't a major main character, and it was someone who'd been alive for 15,000 years, and it's probably really just had enough at that point in time, which is fair. So that leaves the world free of Asteri, and everybody's happy, kind of, pretty much. The bad guys are pretty much all dead, and everybody's sort of figuring out where they land in this new power structure. Bryce is technically the Queen of the Fae until she decides to dissolve the Fae monarchy and tell everyone to get stuffed, and they can be governed by normal people like everyone else. And I love that, because it is just one way to say, fuck you and your hierarchies. We're all gonna do things fairly now. It was very badass. I enjoyed that a lot, Bryce. That is the Bryce that hoovered up the Archangel. That is the Bryce that I know and love. She also returns the mask and Truth Teller to Nesta, and she gives Nesta the Star Sword as well, because she's like, listen, I think you might need it in the future. I don't need it anymore. You are acquainted with the 8-pointed star, you are acquainted with things that are made, and I think that you might need this sword, so I'm gonna leave it with you. Which suggests some really interesting things could be happening in the next A Court of Thorns and Roses book. Also, I absolutely adored the moment of Bryce's parents coming back to Bryce and saying goodbye to Nesta and Cassian, and I am just gutted that we didn't get to see more of their interactions, because it seems like it meant so much for Nesta to have that positive motherly experience, and I feel like Cassian will have been getting all of the knowledge on the weaponry that is used in Crescent City, and like, oh, I just really wish I could have seen more of that, and I didn't get to see that, so I was a bit sad. All's well that ends well, except I don't actually know if this is the end to the Crescent City series. I heard that this was like the end of the trilogy, but I still think that there is a door that has been left open for this series to continue. There are definitely things that are left open-ended, like Tharion going back and meeting Ari, the fact that the First Light grid is going to stop working, and basically all of the technology in Lunathian is going to stop working because they don't power it with First Light, and they need to figure out a new solution to that, whether it's to reinstate the First Light or if it's to come up with a scientific way around it. And they also need to work on this antidote to the parasite. So there's a lot of different work that needs to be done in this world, but I could also see this being the last time that we see some Crescent City things. I don't know, maybe there'll be like a side story with some of the side characters, or certain characters will appear in other books if there are more sort of crossover events, because obviously Bryce can use the horn to go to other places and potentially other crossovers could happen. We don't know. I think it's left open enough for Sarah J Maas to decide later whether she wants to go back there or not, whether that's in the works or not. But overall, I absolutely love this book, and I feel like I'm so glad that I just read it all in one go. It was such a thrill ride, and I'm so glad that there wasn't any like pacing issues with this one. I just enjoyed every second of it, and I'm really excited to read it again and see all the stuff that I missed, or maybe interpreted in a, like, not the wrong way, but like a different way. But also, if you're still here at this point, please have a conversation with me in the comments, because I really want to talk about this book, and no one else that is reading it that I know and normally talk to has read it yet, and I really need to talk about it. Please, please. So if you made it this far into the video and you don't have anything else you want to say, please leave me a star emoji. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you like this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!